In the war crimes trials, the Nazis were accused of setting the Reichstag on fire. The main evidence was that immediately there were laws passed. They had a list already the night when the Reichstag was on fire. They had a list of the people they wanted arrested. And this was considered to be proof. And I thought, well, you know, it's the same way with 9/11. There was an agenda already there, and it was rolled out immediately after the events, which suggests that there was foreknowledge and complicity to provide a pretext for these wars in the Middle East. The idea of conspiracy being an irrational belief, the idea of conspiracy is a sound legal concept. We use it all the time. We prosecute gangsters in the United States for conspiring. Conspiracies happen. We know that. Iran-Contra, Watergate. So how can you have a concept that dismisses all conspiracies as improbable or impossible? It also doesn't make any sense. It's an unsubstantiated theory of its own. When people dismiss conspiracy theories, what they're doing is embracing a coincidence theory. They're assuming that all these things, yeah, they didn't catch the hijackers getting on the planes, and yeah, there was a group of elites who said we needed to have a new Pearl Harbor. And yeah, there were all these war games going on at the time. And yeah, the buildings fell. All coincidental. All coincidences. So what's going on is you have an unsubstantiated theory that's being smuggled in with this pejorative term. But it is the opposite of the way we think about most crimes. If there was a man who married a wealthy woman and the woman died of a freak accident, and then he married another wealthy woman and she died of a freak accident, we would say, this guy's killing his wives. We would certainly suspect that. We would interrogate him. We want to know, where were you when she died from the freak accident? It would be our automatic response. The TV shows on crime use this constantly. They will look for patterns in crimes to identify the suspect. It's just a normal thing. It's criminology 101. And yet when we look at elite political crimes, we see them one at a time. Even when there are obvious connections, like the Kennedy assassinations or the 2000 and 2004 elections. Conspiracy theory is generally fairly widely accepted. If you do public opinion polls and ask people do they believe the official account of the assassination of President Kennedy, overwhelmingly people do not. They believe that there was some kind of conspiracy. The Kennedy assassination was reinvestigated in 1975. The Congress concluded there was a conspiracy, but they didn't know who. It was never prosecuted. The CIA and the intelligence agencies are actively shaping how we perceive events. And we know this because the conspiracy theory concept, there was a propaganda program initiated by the CIA to get people to use that term as a counter to critics of the Warren Commission.
I'm just a patsy.
I first understood conspiracy theory when they were talking about the Kennedy assassination. And it's the choice between, was it a lone gunman or was it a conspiracy? And so that's where the term comes from. It doesn't even apply here. The official story is a conspiracy theory in the literal sense, that you have this conspiracy of a bunch of people to make this thing happen. What I'm basically saying, and what most of the people in the truth movement are saying is, yes, there was a conspiracy, but it wasn't a bunch of Arabs that got together and did this. It's basically a bunch of rich, powerful guys in white shirts and ties and suits and so forth that are the ones that we should be looking at. There's all the signs that the people who were behind this had to have had connections with military to have access even to the kinds of materials used to bring the buildings down. They had to have access to the buildings to be able to plant it. They had to have access to all the means they have to cover this up. So there's lots of signs that there are people working at various levels in a coordinated manner to make this event happen.
It's very hard to convince people that American public officials would do these kinds of things. People just say, well, they wouldn't go along with it, and If they did, they couldn't organize it. It's too complicated. They couldn't organize an action like that and not have it detected. And if they could, somebody would talk and it would get out and we'd know about it. Americans know you can keep secrets. We kept the Manhattan Project secret. That had 100,000 people working on it. They built 3 cities from scratch. One was the 5th largest city in Tennessee. This word never got out. Get this, when Truman became president, he was not told about the Manhattan Project until he had been in office for over a week. So we can keep secrets. We kept secret our decoding of the Japanese and German secret codes. That was kept secret all through the war. The idea that you can't keep secrets among large groups of people is just mistaken. We're looking at the events of 9/11, but we tend to not think of 9/11 as connected to the anthrax letter attacks. I call this incident-specific myopia. So it's a nearsightedness. I think of it as driven, we're like victims, we're like abuse victims. These shocking events are so overwhelming, they loom large in our minds, in our perceptions, and we can't see them as if we were above and looking at a bunch of them. We can only just see the one and then to see the other.
The human brain is the most complex organism in the body, and thus the mechanisms by which the mind processes, interprets, and responds to information is equally complex. For example, the human brain is composed of hundreds of billions of neurons, each with thousands of synapses, creating a vastly complex and intricate neural network consisting of up to 100 trillion to up to a quadrillion synaptic connections. At any one time, this organ is processing an infinite amount of information, both from its internal and external environment, most of which we are unconscious of. However, it is often that information, of which we are largely unaware, that has the most significant influence over our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Even those thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that we adamantly believe to be consciously determined. We assume that when we are looking at something, we are consciously analyzing it based upon the visual information that is entering the brain from the eyes. But this is not entirely accurate. In fact, visual stimuli transduced by the rods and cones in the eyes and sent by electrochemical signals to the central nervous system via the optic nerves does not go directly to the occipital cortex, which is the primary region responsible for processing visual information. Instead, it first goes to the lateral geniculate nucleus of the thalamus, another region of the brain that is a part of the limbic system and important to emotional arousal. To put this in simpler terms, this means that you can experience an emotional reaction to something before you are consciously aware that you have even seen it, which in turn then affects how you see it. Alternative explanations of political assassinations, terrorist attacks, and other national tragedies that differ from official state accounts are sometimes dismissed by the general public because they evoke strong cognitive dissonance, a psychological phenomenon which occurs when new ideas or information conflict with previously formed ideologies and accepted beliefs. In psychology, a false belief generally refers to one that has been manipulated, often purposely and outside of the person's awareness, and sometimes in a very specific direction or misdirection. The use of repression and terror, including threats of censorship, suppression of information, imprisonment, and torture by leaders to silence political opponents and dissidents, is not exclusive to authoritarian states. Such tactics can also be employed by leaders of democratic states, a fact that can be difficult for people to acknowledge, especially if it is not consistent with their belief system. Although some people may harbor cynicism about bureaucrats and politicians, most do not want to believe that public officials in general, and especially those at the highest office, would participate in election tampering, assassinations, mass murder, or other high crimes, especially in democratic societies. Protecting democracy demands that citizens must be made aware of how they can be manipulated by government and media into forfeiting their civil liberties and duties. Information vital to protecting citizens from crimes against democracy orchestrated by the state, as history has repeatedly demonstrated, can happen particularly in times of disaster, collective shock, and national threat.
I believe in human curiosity and human intelligence
And there's a limit to how long people can go on thinking that one bullet inflicted 7 wounds on 2 different people in the presidential car in Dallas in 1963. That sort of thing slowly becomes ridiculous because of what's being called paradigm shift. It's not that you persuade the older generation die. And then you have a new generation whose minds have not been distorted by the propaganda campaigns. The mainstream media are, in a sense, digging their grave by adhering to a position on conspiracy theories which they could get away with back in the days of the Kennedy assassination because they monopolized American access to information. They don't have that monopoly anymore, and they're losing to the internet. And one of the reasons that people are going to the internet and not to the mainstream media, if anyone is curious about 9/11, they know they have to go to the internet. So in a sense, I think that technology has become a great ally for those of us who want the truth.
This is a big issue. I mean, this is not just the 9/11, it's not just the buildings or the science or the physics, but it opens up into a very, very huge issue out there. And no one person can tackle this issue. But it's my opinion that if you know about it, do something. Whether you're an artist, whether you're a poet, whether you're a singer, you don't have to be an engineer for sure about this. Matter of fact, most of the more brilliant people out there are not engineers. They're very, very intelligent people that know what's going on. So I like to say, not everybody can do everything, but everyone can do something. You can do your little part to help share what's really going on out there.
You need to wake up. You need to look at what's really going on, not just the myth, the propaganda. There are ways to bring about fundamental change in the way people think, the way people coordinate together with government and so forth. And something of that sort is needed in the United States as much as any other country in the world. What does it take to actually trigger something akin to a revolution in a sense? We have a power structure that's controlling what happens in the US government, that's not operating in the best interests of the people of the United States. It's operating in the interests of corporations and a wealthy elite class and so forth. Peaceful revolutions have occurred. Gandhi in India is, of course, probably the first one that comes to mind. There's a book out there called A Force More Powerful. It's a book and a video done at the same time. I highly recommend it. The video focuses on 6 nonviolent revolutions in the 20th century that were successful.
I'm the sole U.S. citizen on this panel, I happen to notice, so I have perhaps a special responsibility here and an obligation. I want to say that I am a proud and patriotic American U.S. citizen. I served in the military. I've been a federal employee. I've represented the United States as a Fulbright scholar in 4 countries. And I think my country has a proud history, not all of it, but much of it, and we've done some wonderful things, and I have not given up on my country. I was at the original hearings when the Twin Towers were proposed in New York as a city planner, and I supported the building of the Twin Towers proposed by David Rockefeller to keep the financial district in the downtown. It was migrating north, and that's why it was built. I supported it because I felt it made good planning sense, and I was well aware of the internal structure of this building. Very interesting structure, unique, actually. I had done work in structural engineering. My first degree was in architecture. And so when I saw the videos of the collapse of the building, I said, something's fishy here. And it seems to me that my doubts have been confirmed here. I have found nothing in the evidence that's been presented here to change my mind. I've tried to be a fair panelist, and I went back and reread the 9/11 Commission report. I can tell you it doesn't improve with age. I did my first Fulbright in the Soviet Union in 1978. I'm well aware of what an authoritarian state is like to live in, and I don't want that for my grandchildren. I want my open, free, democratic society back. And so